Investing in commercial real estate. The importance of defining real property for like-kind exchanges. An essential investment tool provided by the U.S. Internal Revenue Code is a Section 1031 like-kind exchange, which enables a taxpayer to exchange like-kind real property without having to recognize the gain or the loss on the disposed real property. However, under the U.S. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, Internal Revenue Code Section 1031 only applies to exchanges of real property and not to exchanges of personal or intangible property, making the definition of real property particularly important. It must also be recognized that an exchange of real property held primarily for sale does not qualify as a like-kind exchange. So how does the U.S. Internal Revenue Code define real property, such that you might properly devise your investment strategies when looking to undertake a Section 1031 like-kind exchange? Internal Revenue Code Regulation Section 1.1031A3 defines real property as land and improvements to lands, unsevered natural products of the land, and water and airspace superadjacent to land. Tangible property. Tangible property is real property for purposes of Section 1031 if it meets any of the following. On the date it is transferred in an exchange, the property is classified as real property under the law of the state or local jurisdiction in which the property is located. See Internal Revenue Code Regulation Section 1.1031A3A6. The property is specifically listed as real property in Internal Revenue Code Regulation Section 1.1031A3, such as inherently permanent structures like buildings, structural components, and unsevered natural products of land. The property is considered real property based on all the facts and circumstances under the various factors provided in Internal Revenue Code Regulation Section 1.1031A3A2, such as property affixed to or integrated into real property. Each distinct asset is separately analyzed from any other distinct asset to which it relates for purposes of determining whether the asset is real property under Section 1031, per Internal Revenue Code Regulations Section 1.1031A3A4. Intangible property. Intangible property is real property for purposes of Section 1031 if it meets any of the following, subject to the exceptions provided in intangible property that is never real property under Section 1031, as will be subsequently discussed. On the date it is transferred in an exchange, the property is classified as real property under the law of the state or local jurisdiction in which the property is located. It is specifically listed in Internal Revenue Code Regulation Section 1.1031A3 as real property, such as fee ownership, co-ownership, a leasehold, an option to acquire real property, an easement, and stock in a cooperative housing corporation. It derives its value from real property or an interest in real property and is inseparable from that real property or interest in real property, for example, an easement or an option to acquire real property, as per Internal Revenue Code Regulation Section 1.1031A3A5. Intangible property that is never real property on Section 1031. The following assets are exceptions and not real property for purposes of Section 1031, regardless of the classification of the property under state or local law. Stock, other than the type of stock that meets in the IRS's classification as real property stock, bonds or notes. Other securities or evidences of indebtedness or interest. Interest in a partnership other than an interest in a partnership that has in effect a valid election under Internal Revenue Code Section 761A to be excluded from the application of all of Subchapter K. Certificates of trust or beneficial interest shows as an action. Real property stock. The following stock is listed in Internal Revenue Code Regulations Section 1.1031A3 as real property for Section 1031 purposes. Stock in a cooperative housing corporation, shares in a mutual ditch, reservoir, or irrigation company described in Section 501C12A. If at the time of the exchange such shares have been recognized by the highest court of the state in which the company was organized or by a state statute as constituting or representing real property or an interest in real property. Property affixed to or integrated into real property. If tangible property is permanently affixed to real property and will ordinarily remain affixed for an indefinite period of time, the property is generally an inherently permanent structure and real property for Section 1031 purposes, regardless of the use or purposes of the property or whether it contributes to the production of income. In addition, a structural component is real property for Section 1031 purposes if it is a constituent part of and integrated into an inherently permanent structure, regardless of whether the structural component contributes to the production of income. For example, items of machinery or equipment are real property for like-kind exchange purposes if they comprise an inherently permanent structure, a structural component of an inherently permanent structure, or are classified as real property under state or local law. The rules for like-kind exchanges of real property are further set out in IRS Instructions for Form 8824. With the consultation and strategic development of investment and tax strategies with knowledgeable professionals, invariably being to the investor's financial advantage. Thank you.